right? So
Oh man, I'm excited.
there's a lot of passing going to happen in that game, and people want to know if wind's going to impact that. So,
Yeah,
anyway,
and that's what we may see. That's what we may. I'm trending toward believing that. I think snow will definitely be a factor.
We have 3 potential games that we are looking at. We posted 2 of them. But you play them.
play them. You got to. You're not going to not play them because of light snow. I mean, I'd rather. Welcome back, guys, to the Fantasy Football Weather Guys. It's NFL Week 2. I'm Doc V, meteorologist for the Fantasy Football Weather Guys. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, meteorologist Sean Bratton. Hey, Sean, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Mike. How we doing going into week 2?
Oh, dude, I'm pumped, man. It was, it's been a crazy week. A lot of things going on in the weather world, but it was great to watch football last weekend and yesterday, last night. What a game that was between the Bengals and the Browns. It was enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure. Joe Burrow and Baker Mayfield really going at it. Let me tell you, that was a much more exciting game than I think most people were expecting. Over 300 yards, 350 yards for Burrow, some touchdowns for Baker, people making plays, and it was an exciting matchup.
Dude, I think Joe Burrow looks like the real deal. I mean, I'm actually a little bit envious as a New York Jets fan because I do not like the way that the Sam Darnold looks like. I mean, it's just not a good story in New York for us right now.
I mean, you got Adam Gase as coach, so there's only a limit to how much you can do under that offensive scheme with that coach.
Yeah, for real. I mean, NFL Week 1's in the books, right? Fantasy football Week 1 is in the books.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel after going through the first week of football?
It was it was a great week and it was a really weird week at the same time. There were some great surprises, like I own Josh Jacobs in a bunch of leagues. Great performance, 3 TD performance for Josh Jacobs. Clyde Edwards-Helaire showed flashes of brilliance. That was super exciting. But then you had people like Drew Brees, right? Michael Thomas going down. He did not have a great performance for me. DJ Moore looked like he was lost on the field.
Yeah.
There were just a couple of players that you expected big things from and came up a little bit short. But everybody's got a little rust right now because there's no preseason, right? So I think everyone's gets a mulligan for the first week.
Yeah, well, we played each other in one of our leagues, and I think you were the top scorer of the week. You just killed it. Your teams have been really good, and I do want to say I have something to complain about here. My fantasy football
that should surprise nobody.
My fantasy football team in our league of record, it scored the lowest out of any team this past week. 95 points. I was literally
and that's in a 3 wide receiver league too. That's not 2. That's and QBs get additional points per completion. So 95 is a very poor performance.
Literally the worst performance of the year. And let me just tell you this. I had guys like Odell Beckham Jr., Bryan Edwards, the rookie for the Raiders.
You didn't start him though.
I did. Kerryon Johnson.
Oh wow!
And then,
Kerryon did nothing.
These guys combined.
Although Odell got you a touchdown last night, so
right. He redeemed himself. Yes, he redeemed himself last night, but he still killed me week 1. So I'm not happy about week 1. But anyway, we'll move on from that. It's a fresh new week, guys. We're excited to be here today, and we're excited to talk about some of the interesting things that are happening on our planet. Because let me tell you, it's 2020, and there's a hell of a lot of things happening on our planet today that is just mind-boggling. So, Sean, what do you think? Do you want to start up this show here and get us going with some weather things?
Yeah, so I think we're going to first start. Mike has up the website for us here, and we previewed this last week. But again, just want to go over a few tools. Mike, I think it's good if we start with our weather table for the week.
Yeah, let's bring it up.
So if you scroll down the website, you'll see that's essentially a summary of what to expect this week as far as weather and if there's any fantasy impacts. And right now, it is a quiet week. And we'll talk actually more about why it's going to be a quiet week in a bit. But then we also have some additional tools for you to take a look at. We have weather maps, and we previewed these yesterday. I want to quickly take a look at these because one cool feature about these maps, and again, you can go on our website and take a look at these in depth as much as you'd like, but you notice that there are circles with X's, and the color in those circles, well, first off, those circles indicate stadiums, but then they also give us an impact or an idea as if there's going to be an impact due to weather.
Right.
So this is a really cool tool if you're like, hey, I want to look ahead. Is there going to be weather for a Monday night game or for a Sunday night game? You could do this yourself. And we have precipitation. So, hey, is it going to rain? And we also have a wind map as well. And those are two of the big variables that we look at when it comes to is weather going to have an influence on fantasy football, is how much rain are we getting and how windy is it going to be. Those are the two. And then the other one being temperature as well.
Yeah. So,
Mike, you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I just want to say that for the stadiums that have circles with a little dot in them, those are the stadiums that are essentially have an option or have a dome to cover up the field. So we, typically when there's bad weather, we don't have to worry about those locations. That's why I'm just putting them on there to show you where those locations are. And these stadiums will update each week, the locations of them, depending on if there's a home game there. And I think the last thing I want to mention is that if you see the green X with a circle, that's a no impact day. If you see like an orange color there, it's a caution, meaning there's some weather going on. There may or may not be impacts. It's something that we're keeping an eye on. And then if you see the red X, that's where there's some extreme impacts coming. And we feel, at least the forecast model that we're looking at is predicting some potential significant impacts. So that's the last thing I think is important from these guys here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Looking at those colors for game day for the times of the games is really, really important. So if you're a person that's like, well, I just kind of want to take a look at what games are being impacted and what's the weather going to be, maybe you're not into the map thing. We also have a blog that we update every week. Mike, do you want to kind of navigate to that blog, the Weather Summary and Impacts blog?
Yes, sir.
And we could take a quick look at that. So under the weather or the fantasy weather impact blog is the first option here. If you click on that, Mike and I provide a summary of what the weather in general is looking like for that week, just over the U.S. And then we highlight some games that we potentially need to monitor or games that we're confident will have an impact. And this will kind of be updated throughout the week. And right now, the only game, and this is kind of swaying because this is a impact game due to wind. And so our models are kind of going back and forth as to how much of an impact this may have. But the only potential for an impact is at Tampa Bay. So the Panthers are at the Bucks. Temperature is going to be in the low 80s. No precipitation, but the one thing that we are monitoring is winds that can maybe potentially get up to 20 miles an hour plus, but we're looking at more consistent winds around 10 to 15 miles an hour. Now that's on the lower end, so we don't expect there to be any major player impacts at this point in time, but we will update this throughout the weekend and especially Sunday if anything changes.
Yeah, so it sounds like pretty mild week in weather for NFL, and we typically expect this, right? Early on in the season. We haven't really gotten to that fall pattern yet. We get those big storms.
Exactly. And I mean, typically as we transition into fall, that's when we see the storm tracks navigate a little bit further south. And that's where we have, a lot of bigger events as we go into fall. But right now, typically, unless it's a tropical storm or convection, so that means thunderstorms or maybe some wind, we usually don't see a lot of impacts of this early on in the season. But we have, a huge area of high pressure over the United States, which is causing there to be a lot of fair weather. And so what we want to do here is we are the fantasy football weather guys. And we obviously care about fantasy football a lot and how that's influenced by weather. But we also want to, kind of give an opportunity for us to talk a little bit more in depth about the weather, especially weeks like this, where there's not a single event that's impacting a series of games. Sometimes Mike and I are just going to want to kind of sit back and take a look at the weather across the United States and say, okay, what is going on? Why do we have the weather we do? And potentially are there any interesting events going on?
Yeah, we want to nerd out. We want to talk about the weather and enjoy it and provide educational information here for you guys to kind of understand what we see. So maybe one day you can be up here with us talking about the weather, right? So
absolutely, that's the dream.
Yeah. So let's talk about Sunday. Let's talk about the synoptic pattern here. The large scale pattern here for Sunday. There's something that is jumping off the screen here on this precipitation plot, Sean.
Yeah, where do you see a lot of coloring right now?
Looks to me there's
usually when there's more colors, it usually means there's more rain.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, we're looking at Beta down there, right, Mike?
That's right. That is currently Tropical Storm Beta. Guys, we've gotten to the Greek alphabet of naming tropical cyclones in the Atlantic Basin. Do you know the only other time that's ever happened, Sean? What other season?
My guess is 2005.
Bam!
Right?
You killed it, bro. That is exactly right. 2005 is the only year that we've made it into the Greek alphabet, and we actually had 2 storms develop today. Three storms. We had Wilfred, Alpha, and Beta. So Alpha and Beta are those Greek alphabets. Let me say this right now. 2005 is the only year we got to the Greek alphabet, right? So we only had one other Alpha and one other Beta in history. Those storms developed back in October of 2005. We are literally a month ahead of what 2005 experienced, and that was our record-setting hurricane season, right? So it has been just a tremendous amount of activity.
Extremely active year as far as in the tropics and development of a lot of just tropical activity, and we're going to get into more about maybe why that is and our current setup and Mike mentioned a couple storms that we're looking at. And Mike, do we want to go to maybe look at those a little bit more comprehensively?
Yeah, well, let's take a quick look at this wind plot, right? And talk about what's going on synoptically. So Sean mentioned there's a high pressure system that's pretty much over the Northeast, and it's going to sponsor some pretty chilly, weather for the time of year. I think there's going to be a freeze in some of the higher elevations of New England. I think I saw Albany, New York, supposed to get down into the mid 30s. It's going to be pretty chilly out there. That's a big high pressure system, and you can see in the wind field, right? You got this. The winds are moving counter clockwise around that circulation. And what's happening here is you see a lot of oranges and reds over the western Atlantic, and that extends across Florida and into this tropical cyclone, this tropical storm Beta.
Yeah, and look at and that's the area we're interested in. And again, this is not precipitation, this is wind. So the areas that are more red and orange and yellow, that's an indication of stronger winds, and that's what we're really interested in. And that's the feature that could influence weather in Tampa for this weekend.
Yeah, the models are suggesting as the afternoon goes on, the wind could pick up a little bit, maybe in the second half of that Carolina at Tampa Bay game. So there is some concern later in the game, but usually we don't see these big wind impacts unless it's like these strong winds for pretty much the entire game. That's why we're not too concerned here with the particular game, down in Tampa Bay. But there's a lot of interesting things going on here. Let's get a different view of this picture, right? Let's look out into the entire Atlantic Basin and North America here, and let's look at cloud cover. And there's some prominent features on this map. Sean, what sticks out to you?
What are we looking at, by the way? What is this?
Yeah, this is the satellite imagery. We're looking at essentially a combo of visible and infrared satellite. So you can actually see where the sun is still setting over like the central western U.S. right now. You see some yellows in the surface of the ground there, some cloud shadows. And then you can see all the white shadings and the purples here. These are clouds that we're seeing at nighttime imagery showing that. And there's one big feature out here, right over the western subtropical Atlantic, and that is Major Hurricane Teddy. This is our second major hurricane of the 2020 season. And it's beautiful. I love looking at these types of storms.
And you can actually look at one of the signatures of a well-defined hurricane is the eye of the hurricane. And I know it's a little bit small maybe on your screen here, but you could see right in the middle of that hurricane, and I think Mike is actually zooming in here, is a well-defined eye. And that usually indicates a very strong tropical storm or a very strong hurricane, strong circulation. And that's what Teddy's doing right now. And Mike, what's the category on Teddy right now? Is that a 3 or 3, right?
It's a category 3 hurricane at this point in time. I haven't looked at the latest ops from the National Hurricane Center. Why don't I bring this up quick and do a quick look at this while we have it up. So it actually is weakened a little bit down to 125-mile-per-hour winds sustained. So we are at a Category 3 at the moment, but it's still a healthy storm. And it does. There is a particular track towards the Bermuda location that is concerning for land, but this is not expected to landfall across the U.S. So let's focus more on what's happening closer to the U.S. here and talk about this interesting pattern here with this clouds, right? Look at the Gulf of Mexico here.
Yeah, and there's really three features here, right?
Yeah.
If you notice over the Gulf of Mexico, that was the tropical storm Beta that we were talking about, trying to organize over the central Gulf of Mexico, and we expect that to head northwest very slowly. And then if you look over in the upper right or the northeast portion, you would say, well, what is that? Looks like there's a lot of cloud covers there too. That's associated with a frontal boundary that made its way past the East Coast and is now going off the Western Atlantic.
Yeah, and the models are actually suggesting that Hurricane Teddy is going to interact with this big area of clouds and that frontal boundary area. Mm-hmm. And there's some issues in the models with how the storm interacts with that feature, and if whether or not that interaction can result in a left turn.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, what we were going to show there, unfortunately, the windy site kind of collapsed, is that high pressure is going to move off into the northeast and then off into the Atlantic, and that's going to push the hurricane. First, it's going to push it kind of up to the north, and then it's going to redirect it a little bit west, and it's going to hit over eastern Canada. Yeah. It's like the Nova Scotia region.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty impactful storm there for those guys up there. It's a tough one. I know that at this point, right, it's going to be moving over some fairly cool ocean temperature waters. And I think that the dynamics of this storm is going to transition from a predominantly like a warm core hurricane to something more cold core, which means it transitions into an extratropical cyclone. So the Hurricane Center may drop this storm before it hits Nova Scotia, but it just brings back some bad memories of Hurricane Sandy, right? When the Hurricane Center dropped the warnings of Sandy because it transitioned into a extratropical cyclone, and then they actually called it a superstorm, because it wasn't really a purely tropical system anymore. But we still saw those impacts, the impacts from a storm.
Of course, and we can see that here. And Mike, you bring up a good point, and the viewers may not know, hey, what's the difference between a hurricane or something tropical in nature and that of a extratropical storm? And the big difference there is that a hurricane it gets its life, it's fueled by latent heat. So it needs water because it needs to evaporate water. Yeah. If it doesn't have water, it's basically out of gas. Yeah. Okay? And when you have cool water, it diminishes the hurricane's ability to fuel that process. So when you go over cool water or over land, it really hurts the hurricane. Now, with an extratropical storm, now the storms that we usually get across the United States, those are extratropical. Those are what we call cold core systems. And those are driven what we call dynamically. And those are driven by the upper atmosphere. So we're talking up near the jet stream, and that's where they get their energy from. So even though they may look similar and have similar impacts, the way they work is very different.
Yeah, so that's a great lesson there, Sean. And if you guys if anyone's a big weather fan on here and want to learn more about these types of things, we recommend an education in meteorology, because that's where Sean was able to kind of get all that information there from the good old University at Albany. Go UA.
Absolutely. And we just had somebody come up. Do we have any major weather events that we need to worry about? So the only impact, and this is what we were kind of, the reason that we may potentially have a wind impact over Tampa Bay, so we have Tampa Bay playing the Panthers, is because we have a really strong pressure gradient setting up with high pressure over the northeast and a hurricane approaching the eastern seaboard. Now that hurricane is going to veer off to the north, but it's still going to create really strong winds. And that's what we're seeing in the reds and yellows and oranges here along the East Coast. And so over Tampa, we could get winds out of the east-northeast, and they could approach 20 miles an hour. So right now, we don't think there's going to be any big impacts because we think these winds are going to more intensify later in the game. So this isn't a whole game impact, but it's definitely something we're going to monitor up to game time. So right now we have around 15 to 20 sustained and then maybe gust 20 plus. But we don't expect there to be major impacts. And that is actually the only game that we're really concerned about right now.
Yeah, pretty quiet week in the weather world with regards to football. But that being said, there's another disturbance on this map that I want to kind of talk about here, and that's this tropical storm beta. So I'm actually going to bring up the National Hurricane Center, the map for the National Hurricane Center, and this is their outlook, right? So the Hurricane Center named Tropical Storm Wilfred over the Eastern Maine Development Region today. It's only at a 35 knot storm wind, 35 knots, a sustained winds. There was another developing subtropical storm Alpha that actually made landfall. Sean, do you know where it made landfall? Because it's pretty rare.
Where did it make landfall, Mike?
The coast of Iberia. A storm literally developed right off the coast of Iberia and landfalled. This was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen because the National Hurricane Center put out a 30% chance that this storm had to develop. And then the next update, boom, we have a subtropical storm. And now we're like, everyone in the weather community was looking at Tropical Depression 22, which is now Tropical Storm Beta, and they were thinking that this storm was going to be Alpha. But this was a complete surprise for a lot of the folks in the community. And we saw Alpha landfall across Iberia, and now we're watching this Tropical Storm Beta. And I'm gonna
and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Mike. But Mike, can you actually just go back real quick?
Oh,
because I want to point out an interesting feature. Sure. If you can go.
I'm going back. Here we go.
Mike, what do you notice off the west coast of Africa, and as you progress further west?
So I see a number of things in here. There is a area of clear air right off the coast of Western Africa, and that is something that is known as a dry and dusty air mass called a Saharan air layer outbreak. And it's essentially this plume of dusty, dry air that causes essentially clouds to be pretty much suppressed or reduced, but it also pushes off dust particles right over the atmosphere. So if anyone was living across the northern half of the U.S., right, over this last week, what happened? What was a rare phenomena that happened to the sun? It was blocked by something.
Yeah. What do we call that?
Well, it was a bunch of fire smoke that was evected off the wildfires out over the western U.S. and it got pushed by the jet stream across the northern half of the U.S. and it literally blocked some of the sun from. I'm in Boston, guys, and I couldn't even the sun. It looked like it was cloudy, but literally there were no clouds in the sky. It was literally smoke. So that aerosols in the air was caused essentially. This disruption in the visibility of the sun getting down, and this is what happens under the same exact process happens underneath the Saharan air layer. So,
yeah, and what I also noticed there is maybe a wave train setting up.
Oh yeah, so we have
one right after another. If you look at, you have Teddy, then we have Wilfred, and then we have another one or a couple others developing off the west coast of Africa.
Yeah,
the Saharan coast there, and that's not an atypical thing to occur. These tropical wave trains, where you have one storm forming over the next, in like basically one right after the other.
Yeah, we these are things that I studied in graduate school, right? Focusing on African easterly waves and these dynamics and how to understand when you get these periods of easterly wave trains that turn into hurricane trains. We're seeing that right now, right? We're seeing these. A number of these easterly waves develop into tropical cyclones or hurricanes. And it does look like there's another wave coming off the coast of Africa. We are at September 18th. The West African monsoon is starting to shut down, right? We're getting to that point of year where the Atlantic Basin and the African continent transitions out of the summertime and moves into the fall time. When that happens, we typically see the easterly waves stop pumping off of Africa. And that's just a normal progression, right? And what typically happens in the hurricane season is we see the developing tropical cyclones happen closer to home. Pretty much similar to what happened with Beta, over the Gulf of Mexico or over the Caribbean Sea.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, which is super rare, is that we're having these African easterly waves, these wave trays setting up. We're already into the Greek alphabet, and it's only September.
Yeah.
I mean, we have tropical storms or tropical development that could go through November.
Yeah.
Because remember that you may say, well, I thought, it needed to be warm for hurricanes, but remember that water has a higher specific heat. Okay, so it stays warmer longer and cooler longer. It's harder to warm it up. So even though we're going into fall and things are getting cooler for us, the ocean waters are still really warm. So there's still a lot of potential for more storms to form as we transition into fall here.
Yeah, and that's something to keep in mind for the upcoming winter season if you live along the eastern seaboard. If those ocean temperatures stay warmer relative to normal standards, it could act to, enhance some storm tracks along the eastern seaboard, which allows for maybe some stronger coastal nor'easters. So something that we obviously can't predict this far out, but it's something that to keep in mind. So I just want to quickly turn the attention back to beta here because this is going to be the main event as we look into the next week in the weather world. And the National Hurricane Center, this is the website that I'm on. They're the experts that protect try to protect our lives and property and gives us the most up-to-date warning information. They're the official word. If you guys have any, questions about what to do during hurricanes or how to prepare for them, there's a lot of useful information from this website. But the National Hurricane Center is predicting that this tropical storm beta may intensify into a hurricane as it approaches the Texas coast. Now, take a look at this track, Sean. That is a very interesting track where essentially the next 24 hours or 48 hours, it tracks kind of due north. Then it takes this left turn towards Texas, and then it intensifies into a hurricane. And what do you see about the cone here of uncertainty? What do you notice as time goes on?
That cone of uncertainty gets a lot greater. So what that's telling us is that forecasters are not really certain exactly where this is going to end up. And it's a slow mover. It's stalling out.
Yeah.
So that could be a really big problem because if it stalls out over land, there's constant precipitation and rain that's going to occur across coastal Texas here, and there could be some flooding issues.
Yeah, I mean, the last storm that comes to mind when we're talking about Texas hurricanes that stall is Hurricane Harvey. And Hurricane Harvey produced over 40 inches of rain in parts of southeastern Texas. It was completely flooded out there. And you have to worry about this. This could be another historical rain event, depending on the precise track of this tropical cyclone. I do have an interesting tidbit, Sean. And we'll do a little weather trivia here, okay?
All right, let's do trivia. Everyone loves trivia.
All right. So, do you know how many storms have hit the U.S. to date in this year? I'm sorry, in the current 2020 season. How many storms has made landfall over the U.S.? Has it been less than 6?
No.
Between 6 and 8, or greater than 8?
No. Greater than 8.
Okay. Yes. So we've had 8 storms.
Oh, so it was
It was at 8. Okay. But that being said,
close enough.
This storm here is number 9, right? Number 9. So 9 tropical storms or hurricane strikes in the U.S. And that actually ties a record. That ties a record for the most number of storms to strike the U.S. in a given season. Now, here's the other trivia question I have for you, and it's a multiple choice. I'm going to give you three options. Excuse me. What year holds the record for the most number of landfalling tropical cyclones across the continental U.S.? Is it A, 1916, B, 2005, or C, 2018?
Ooh, yeah, you have a variety in there. I mean, I want to go with 2005 because it was an incredibly active season, and we had a lot of strong, also landfalling hurricanes. but I'm interested in why you threw in 1916 in there. But I'm going to still go with my gut in 2005.
Oh, you almost had it, Sean. 2005 was the trap answer there. 1916 was the right answer, and we had 9. You're right on there, man. That was great logic.
I was wondering. That was a very random date. I was like, okay, there had to be something that occurred in 1916.
Yeah, so it's 1916. We had 9 landfalling storms, and that's the record. This obviously is, we're obviously going to tie that record here. I'm pretty sure. And since it's only the second or third week of September, we have a real shot of breaking that record. And that's kind of crazy when you think about what has happened in 2020.
It's the year of the unknown,
yeah.
And I feel like everything is just coming at once, including weather.
It's just plowing us over, Sean. It just makes us feel like we're humans, because we are. Everyone is in this together. So
exactly,
it's crazy.
Do we have anything else as far as hurricanes, or do we want to kind of look at maybe what to expect over the next month or 2 or 3 here?
Well, before we get to so I have two other things I want to show, 2 images I want to show here.
Okay.
And then we can talk about a little bit about the upcoming month, because everyone loves looking at the upcoming month of weather. We had some pretty significant forest fires out across parts of the Pacific Northwest into California. Now,
I'm glad you're bringing this up.
The forest fires in California are common, right? We see these things happen during dry years, and it's pretty dry in California. It was a desert at one point, right? And then it rained a lot, and we got some greenery, and people moved out there at some point in our nation's history. And now we're starting to see it dry up again, and we're seeing a lot more forest fires. And we're seeing the forest fires. There was a period of extreme heat up the coast of the western U.S., and it dried things out. And there was, I think, a number of reasons why we had forest fires. I actually saw one reason on the news. Someone did a gender reveal party out there and did some kind of explosive bomb, and whatever it blew up to be, blue or pink, it would be a boy or girl. And I think from that explosion, we saw one of this very massive forest fire out there. Just boggles your mind, like.
I hope it was worth it for them.
Hey, I mean, I don't know, because a lot of people lost homes in that. But I want to bring up some imagery from the Pacific Northwest of what actually life looked like out there. This is an image of a man cutting his grass in Oregon. I mean, he's got a mask on. It's kind of hard to see the pixelation, but look at the red tint to the sky. Sean, if you were to see this image, where the heck do you think this guy would be? What would be the first thing that you would think?
God, he'd be on like Mars or something.
Yeah, I'm like, did we just colonize Mars and we have trees and plants out there? Because what the hell is going on? Let's take a look at another image here. This is another crazy.
Oh man, that feels like it's like a filter.
Yeah, I know, right? And it also looks like Mars has UPS delivery now. So I mean, it's pretty wild. So I mean, I just wanted to share these images here because
I mean, and this isn't at night. I'm guessing this is at least during the day at some point. And so with all that particulate matter in the air, it basically, that particulate matter absorbs and reflects the sun's rays in different ways. Yep. And that's why it looks very red to us. So it's the same reason why we have the sky that's blue. It's something called Rayleigh scattering. It's how the particles in the gases scatter in the visible light spectrum. And so that's why this looks like it's almost red.
Yeah. That's kind of different than what we're used to. I mean, typically at night we see the blue enhance during sunset, right? We call this the blue hour. And that happens because exactly what you just said. When the sun is setting along the horizon, that light is getting bent, and it's essentially scattering out a lot of this red coloring out to space, and all that's left is the blue in the sky. So if you look at like a white wall during sunset or during the blue hour, that's why we see a lot more blue, like shades of blue at night. So this was something I've never seen before, and it is wild. All right, so let's transition off a little bit here into the upcoming few weeks across the U.S. I have a weather map here. This is the American subseasonal model. This is the CFS V2 model, right? And what we're looking at are temperature departures from normal. So wherever you see the yellows and the reds and the pinks, essentially showing you where temperatures are going to be warmer than average. and especially getting to those reds and pinks, those are going to be much warmer than average. And then on the other side, we have the blues and purples and pinks, right? And that's essentially your temperatures are colder than average. So this is the forecast for the next week, right? And we're seeing this split in temperatures across the U.S. We have a lot of anomalous warmth across the northwestern 2/3 of the nation, and a lot of below normal temperatures over the eastern U.S. And we actually alluded to this earlier, right, Sean? The colder than average temperatures are there because of a certain pressure pattern, right? What is that?
Are you talking about the high pressure?
I am.
That was, yeah. I mean, there was, I mean, there's, and that exactly. That's what we were looking at in the beginning here. We had a high pressure over the Great Lakes and over the Northeast. And what happens is because winds travel clockwise around a high, so on the front side of the high, it's funneling in all the cold air from Canada. All right. And the same reason why it's warmer on the West Coast, because on the back end of a high, you have air coming up from the tropics. So you have an area that's going to be much warmer.
And
so these large synoptic patterns, you may think of them as just bringing weather, or nice weather, or cloudy weather, or rainy weather, but they also are responsible for advecting. We call this advection in meteorology, advecting temperatures into different areas.
Hey, Sean, talk about weather. What's your favorite type of weather, bud?
I grew up, the reason I got into weather is because of tornadoes.
Oh.
That is the reason that I got into weather. So that is severe weather, mesoscale meteorology, we call that, is my favorite.
You had a pretty big severe weather event this year, right? Where you live in Chicago.
We had what was called a derecho. And so these are rare events. They're usually typically a linear bowing of storms, and they're associated with really, really strong winds, straight line winds, that can exceed even 100 miles an hour at times. And these are driven by the upper atmosphere. So basically what the atmosphere does is it drags down all the really, really high wind speeds aloft, okay, way up in the air, and brings them toward the surface. And so we had some winds here. There were several trees down. People had property damage. There was house damage. And the other thing with this derecho is it extended all the way from Iowa into Wisconsin, into Illinois. So this wasn't just an isolated one small region. This was a widespread event.
I remember seeing the pictures from your wife and posting them to social media of all the damage that was kind of scattered about the streets of Chicago. You just don't expect to see weather like that in a major city, right? I mean, I wouldn't expect to see a derecho where I live.
No, I mean, and we had a tornado, a confirmed sighting of a tornado in Rogers Park. So sometimes it's really difficult to determine, hey, was this straight line wind damage, or was this a tornado? But there's certain things that the surveyors look for, and they determined that there was a weak tornado that came through in the Chicago area as well. So yeah, it was a pretty profound event.
Yeah, I'm trying to, while you're talking, I was trying to bring up the pictures from Katie's site, but my computer is too laggy, so I can't do it. So let's move into this upcoming forecast here and look at the how the temperature pattern is going to evolve here in the next couple of weeks. So this is a model's prediction. These are not the views of Sean and I. We're just kind of going over what the models are showing right now. But it does appear that the models, this particular model, wants to keep that warm pattern out across the western U.S. And that concerns me a little bit, Sean. Because it makes me a little worried about the fires that have been happening out there.
Dry and warm.
Yeah.
The bigger issue there is how dry it is, right? If they're not getting any precipitation, and it's just continuing to be dry, that's going to add fuel for this fire, and it's not going to help matters.
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate situation that's happening out there, and a lot of it has to do with how the Pacific Jet is oriented, and we have this pretty much like the illusion.
What is a jet, by the way, Mike?
It's a really bad football team.
Good answer.
Was that what you're looking for? Because
I mean, I wasn't, but I'm glad you added it because it's also true.
Okay. Well, I'm allowed to say it because I'm a Jets fan living in New England. My life sucks. Anyway, so yeah, a jet is essentially a flow in the atmosphere of air. that is accelerated. And it's usually, they can happen at different levels in the atmosphere. The most common level we look at, the jet stream, is usually pretty high up, around, um, anywhere between 300 and 200 millibars, which is close to the tropopause. That's a very sciencey term, essentially the layer in the atmosphere that separates the troposphere from the stratosphere. But this is where that jet stream is usually peaked. And we typically see these jet streams set up because of temperature gradients, right? That's what we were just showing earlier in the show.
Yep, absolutely. So you're saying that, and remember that we were actually talking about, hey, areas of high pressure and areas of low pressure. So the jet stream is a major component of why areas of low pressure and high pressure develop, right, Mike?
That's right. That is definitely one component there. And all that feeds back on the circulation. Those pressure differences feed on the circulation, which then feed back on the temperatures. And it just kind of, it's called like thermal wind balance, essentially. Everything is trying to get back into order. The atmosphere does not like to be unstable. So this is the week 3 forecast here. Looks very similar to our week 1, right? Almost a spit and image. The focus of most anomalous warmth kind of shifts a little bit further west, but does suggest more below normal temperatures for the eastern U.S. And then as we get into a little bit further out into La La Land, I like to call, as we get into this area where there's little scale in the models, they're just pretty much showing above normal temperatures pretty much over every U.S. state in the lower 48.
Yeah. And so one thing I want to point out here is if you're looking at the color bar and you're looking at that there's 3s and 4s and 5s, that's not actually the temperature that we're looking at. That's something called an anomaly. And this is basically a departure from what we expect, a departure from the normal. So when something is a positive anomaly, that means in this case, it's greater than we expect. So the temperature is greater than we expect. And when we see negatives, it's below what we expect, or below normal. So in this case, we see below normal temperatures.
Above.
But in this particular map, we have all reds and yellows and oranges. So what that's telling us is temperatures are above what we would expect for this time of year.
Yeah, we're looking at end of October here into, the wee hours of November. And whenever you see these really anomalous warm patterns in the fall, there's actually a name for them. Sean, do you know what that name is by chance?
Are you? No. I'm trying to think. What term are you looking for?
They're called Indian summers.
Oh, Indian summers. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah.
Bring out the old terminology.
I thought you were talking about a slightly more meteorological term,
Oh,
but yeah.
I mean, that's pretty meteorology to me, an Indian summer. Like, everyone understands what that is. So, essentially, when you get these pretty benign patterns during the fall. But you know what? As you get this far, there is always these chaotic things that can happen in the atmosphere to change these models' predictions. The models don't handle the tropics well. We know we've had a very quiet West Pacific typhoon season. Had a couple big typhoons that has made our jet stream more amplified and has brought some cooler weather for us in the U.S. and the eastern U.S. Probably sparked some of the fires out in the West too. But the models miss these types of features out at these leads, and those are the things that can really cause us to have what I like to call first forecast curveballs. Right? We just can't really predict those features and how that interacts with the pattern that impacts us. So there's still those chances to happen.
I mean, and yeah, this is, I don't know if you've ever heard of like chaos theory, right? But as we get further out and as our models try to predict further out, it becomes more difficult because their mistakes, or the mistakes the models make, become amplified. And it could completely distort what the actual prediction or forecast is. So that's why you're saying, why can't we know exactly what's going to go on in a week? Well, that's because models have a really tough time resolving with the accuracy needed to be precise enough a week out. We're good to about 3 or 4 days. We're pretty darn accurate. But when we get to the 5, 6, 7 day mark, things start to fall apart a little bit. But we are getting better.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring this all back together, right? We're the Fantasy Football Weather Guys. We are here to kind of educate you guys on meteorology concepts. We're both degreed meteorologists, but we're also here to kind of talk about how the weather plays into football and player production. And when you see a long-range forecast that looks pretty benign, a lot of above normal temperatures and potentially dry conditions, it suggests potentially a we're going to be pretty quiet in the NFL season with regards to really high impact weather events. But that's common. We're used to this in the spring. The summer, late summer and fall, early fall.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I want to mention here is that, we want to make this interactive because, a lot of times when we talk about weather, you see it on TV, it's a news station, it's the Weather Channel. And it's hard to you may have questions for those people, right? As they're going through the weather, why is this happening? What do you expect here? And it's really difficult to interact. They're kind of just saying one thing and kind of moving on. So we want to bring an interactive component here. So if you have any questions for us, whether that be fantasy impacts due to weather, which are very limited this week, fortunately or unfortunately. But also if you just have any general weather questions or any questions about what we discussed, we want to be here to answer them for you. So if you got anything, let us know, and feel free to comment, throughout our talks when we do this.
Yeah, and I do want to say this right now. Since the weather is pretty benign right now, and we expect it to be for the next few weeks, it's your chance and your opportunity to come and chat with us, right? Because when things start to pick up and we start to see more traffic in here from the real fantasy football fans that need to get, and they're going to ask a lot of questions. We saw it last year when Sean and I were handled the Sunday Twitter stream. We got I would say potentially like over 100 questions in an hour or two, and we're sitting there trying to answer all that. We are shifting that entire process to Twitch during those high impact events on Sundays. So if you want to ask your questions on anything about the weather, educational purposes, etc., this is when you should do it now in these early season for the NFL on our 8 p.m. show here on Fridays, and then on because eventually what's going to happen here is some of the diehard fans come in. They're going to start to ask questions specifically on football and how weather impacts those football games that they care about.
Yeah. Exactly. So, what we're trying to do here is we don't have a lot to talk about with how weather is going to impact fantasy football. So we want to kind of bring, like Mike mentioned, an educational component, kind of like a fun component. What's going on with the weather? Why is it behaving the way it is? What are we going to expect the weather to do? And so, we're trying to make it a little bit more fun and interesting. So if you guys have any suggestions for us, please, shout them out. Or if you have any questions, let us know.
All right, Big Sean. I think we covered enough of the weather. We're looking at a NFL Week 2 starting in within 72 hours or just under 72 hours now. It's Friday night, so I'm hoping that things go a little better for me in our league of record. Hopefully, I'll break 100 points this week. I'd love to do that, but I know that I'm playing one of the top teams in the league, so I'm probably gonna lose.
Oh, who are you playing?
I'm playing Alpha Tone.
Oh, you're playing Tony.
Yeah.
Oh, buddy, Tony won the league last year, so he's got a strong team.
Yeah, he does.
He beat me last week, so.
And you had a pretty solid week too. How do you think you're going to do this week here in the upcoming Sunday?
It's not off to a good start. The person I'm playing had Tyler Boyd, so he had about 17 points or so, and I'm going against some really tough defenses. Josh Jacobs is going against the Saints. I got Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I got Drew Brees. Who doesn't have Michael Thomas now.
Huge loss.
So there are a lot of question marks, but
yeah, it was just a tremendous amount of injuries.
You just gotta make it through. It's gonna be a tough week. But
ride that waiver wire, folks, if you're having issues with your injury bug, because there's been a ton of them. All right, so I'm Doc V. You can follow me at MJ Ventures on Twitter. This is my buddy meteorologist Sean Bratton. You can follow him at Sean D. Bratton on Twitter as well. Any questions, please feel free to tweet at us.
And the FF Weather guys, follow us there and look for updates going into this weekend regarding any impactful weather for fantasy purposes.
All right, guys, good luck. Week 2 is upon us.